In this video, we're going to talk about different ways of reducing the use of resources, especially those that are finite. Okay, and we're going to go through the exam style questions and the themes that go through them. So the question really is about recycling. So here, why do you recycle? Now, that question might be about any specific metal, aluminium or iron, for example, wood, paper or plastic. And there are several themes as to how we'd answer this question and several different answers. First of all, we want to conserve the ores, okay, and we want to conserve the crude oil or fossil fuels that we use, okay, because they're finite, they're non-renewable. So here we've got a pump, and that pump pumps oil out of the ground. So we want to conserve the crude oil and we want to conserve the ores. Remember, you can substitute that for fossil fuels. Also, if you look here, we have got a massive landfill site. Now that is ugly, not very good, releases lots of pollution into the local environment, okay, smells as well and things like that. And we don't want to use landfill unless we have to. And landfill is where we put material that we don't recycle generally and that we allow to break down over many, many, many years. So we want to reduce the use of landfill, okay, and prevent the use of it so that we don't actually go there at all. But that takes a hell of a lot of recycling. Next one. We use oil, we burn the oil, and it powers trucks, cars, and it powers ships. Now, that's not really the important point I'm trying to make here. What I'm trying to make the point is, when you recycle, so it's all about recycling, you will not put as much material on trucks to go such distances, and you also will not put as much cargo on ships to go around the world. And all of this is fueled by crude oil. So you'll conserve crude oil, but at the same time, okay, you won't produce as much CO2 emissions because you'll use less trucks, you'll use less ships because you'll be recycling the material. If that's the case, we can go to the next one, which is to do with mining and quarries. So you've got here a picture of a quarry, and you can see that the excavator is just putting the mined ore into the lorry, which will then drive off. Okay, and that uses lots of crude oil, lots of fossil fuels, all non-renewable, finite and things like that. But also there's an environmental impact to doing a quarry. So our next point is going to be the environmental impact that's caused by the mining or quarrying. So we've got four different parts here, four really important parts. Conserving the fuels, the fossil fuels, and conserving the ores. That's why we recycle. We don't want to put our rubbish into landfill, so that's why we recycle. We don't want to release lots of carbon emissions, so less trucks, less ships is why we recycle. And we don't want the environmental impact caused by the quarrying and the mining, which again is why we recycle. So let's go through the first type of question. And this can be generic, we're comparing plastic straws to paper straws, but really what we're looking at is non-biodegradable versus biodegradable. So you can see here the paper straws are biodegradable, they break down into the environment into non-harmful substances, and plastic straws don't. And they end up going into the oceans and becoming microplastics, which is said are being eaten by us now because the fish consume small organisms that have microplastics in, then we eat the fish and such and so forth. So it's not a good thing. So why have we made this change? It's because the plastic straws are not biodegradable, and that's a very bad thing. Next one. How are resources saved by recycling more plastics? Well, remember where plastics come from. Plastics come from oil. So if you recycle, you use less oil. And the plastics use energy to make them and fuels. So you use less energy and less fuel. And remember that the oil used to make the plastic is a non-renewable resource or a finite resource. Okay, so that's how we save on our resources, by recycling more plastics. Our next question is about iron and steel that are regularly recycled. Now, I want you to think of the themes. We deliberately just moved this on. Think of the themes that I talked about. Some pictures there to remind you of a couple of the themes, and try and answer this yourself. Okay, so stop the video and try and do it. We need two reasons. There are many more than two reasons, but I've given you two pictures, so you should be able to get those. Right, okay, so two reasons why we are regularly recycling them. It's to conserve the ore and conserve the metal itself. Remember, they're a finite, non-renewable resource. We don't want to use those landfills. Okay, we don't want these big, ugly landfills producing lots of pollution. So that's two good reasons. There's many more, as I said. To conserve the energy or fuel, because remember, there's lots of fuel being used by these trucks and things like that when they're quarrying, and shipping costs, for example, and trucks. Now, reduce waste in general. Again, that goes back to your landfill. You're not going to be throwing it into landfill. And to reduce that quarrying and the mining. So now we're talking about increasing recycling, if you see up there. And we've left the previous question up on the board so you can actually see all the other answers. It might give you a hint with these ones. So you can see this person here is Mother Nature cannot eat plastics. So that's talking about the microplastics that we would take in our diet if we don't recycle more and make sure we don't put our waste into the oceans, for example. Now, if we take that down and look at the actual question, the question itself is suggest how local authorities could increase the recycling of all materials. Now, first of all, local authority or governments or whatever are doing it right now, because what are we doing? We're teaching you that these are the reasons why you recycle. So you will recycle more if you know why you're doing it. So the first point is to provide information and education of the need to recycle. And they do that through all schools and in other ways. Legislate against or charge for waste. And that happens in some countries now, that you will get charged for the waste that you produce. That's one way of doing it, making people pay, unfortunately. Reward or pay people to recycle. So there are, in some countries, you can have a recycle return scheme. So you put your bottle in, and depending on how many bottles you put in, you get a certain amount of money back for recycling. Put labels on the materials and make sure the label says it's recyclable. So again, that information is provided, that education is provided to recycle. So, and the last thing is provide the recycling bags, bins and everything. And in all countries now, they have recycling bags, bins, and they're collected on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. So we're still going to look at the benefits of recycling, 3 environmental benefits of recycling. I want you to go back and have all those common themes and see if you can pick out these 3 environmental benefits. Of course, there are many more than 3. So we are talking about steel cans and recycling those steel cans. So first of all, steel cans come from metal. Metal comes from an ore. So we are going to conserve that ore. Less iron ore would be used, okay, and that also less other metals that you would use to make the steel. And you would also use less fuel. So that's something you would save on immediately. The next thing we talk about is mining and extraction, as you can see here. That means less mining needed because you're recycling the steel cans, you're not digging the ore out the ground and processing it, and you've got less eyesores in terms of there's less quarries, and obviously you lose less habitat. Next thing is pollution. Now, the ones we're used to are carbon dioxide emissions. So carbon dioxide emissions comes from oil or other fossil fuels, okay, and that leads to climate change, for example. So that's not a very good thing for the environment. So better to recycle so we get less CO2 emissions because we're using less oil. Next thing is acid rain. Acid rain comes from coal predominantly. That is burnt, it releases SO2. The SO2 then dissolves in the water in the clouds and then rains acid rain down on us, and it can destroy crops and it can erode materials and other rocks and statues and buildings and such and so forth. So acid rain is bad as well for the environment. Less global dimming, which is because of carbon particulates that are produced from burning fossil fuels. So we'll get less global dimming if we recycle these steel cans, because we won't be burning as much as these fossil fuels, and less landfill space will be needed because we're not filling it full of our cans, we're recycling them. Now this takes you through 3 of the different areas that you have them on the common themes right at the start of this video. So get used to all those common themes for all these questions. So in this question, we're going to look at recycling versus reusing or sending to landfill. Now, the question specifically asks you why an aluminium car body should be recycled and not reused or sent to landfill. I just want to first of all make a point. Reusing is a very good thing. It's just this question is asking you why do the recycling instead. Now, First thing is, I want to say why it's no landfill. And that's because limited space for landfill, and you would lose a habitat if you chose landfill, because you've got to put all that rubbish in there. Not reusing. Now reusing, again, I'm going to say is a really, really good thing, but there could be damage to that car. There could be rusting, corrosion, there could be problems with the engine, such and so forth. Okay, that might be a reason why you might not reuse. Again, try and reuse because it's a good thing. Why would we therefore recycle? Remember, it says not reuse, not send to landfill. So we've done our points there. We now need to say why recycle. So recycling is good because it conserves the ore. So the aluminium that makes the car comes from aluminium ore. It's called bauxite. And we conserve that because it's a finite, non-renewable resource. Because it's mined out of the ground, we conserve lots of energy. Minimise the pollution because the cars and the trucks and the ships and everything are releasing lots of pollution when they mine it. Okay, and it reduces the need to quarry, to mine that ore. So we've got lots and lots of points here. Remember, this is only going to be a 3-mark question, but you can say, try and identify the different points you put in. So not reuse, not send to landfill, and points about recycling. Our final question is on the recycling of wires, but again, I want you to think of this in a general term. It doesn't have to be copper, it could be anything, it doesn't even have to be wires. What this question is really asking you is saying, how can you recycle metal? Okay, so what do we first have to do? Well, we first have to melt it. In this case, it's a wire, but it could be anything. It could be anything at all. Heat it until the metal itself melts, and then you just reform it into a new shape. And that is how you recycle. So again, think about this in a general term. They might swap this out for another metal, and they might swap that for something else that's made out of metal. It can be done in a very general way.